Welcome to Total Network Operations, the podcast dedicated to hardworking network operators like you who deliver all the packets all the time with a little help from TCP. Here on TNOps, we shine a bright light on great ideas in NetOps so you can take away useful info and make informed decisions for your network and your team. I'm your friendly internet plumber, Scott Robon. Today, we're joined by Joan Garcia, the Director of Network Platforms and Solutions Architecture at Colt Technology Services. I heard Joan speak at Network Automation Forum's AutoCon 1 event in Amsterdam earlier this year, and he had some really interesting things to say that drove me to invite him here to be on TNOps. As evidenced by this episode, he has kindly agreed to be here today. So thank you, Joan, for being here. It's great to have you on TNOps. Tell us more about yourself, what you do, and what's important to you from a NetOps perspective.
My pleasure, Scott. Actually, I must say, the presentation at that event was a bit of an eye-opening for me as a presenter, because I didn't realize that touching on certain of the topics that I had there that were not technically actually was such a point of interest in the audience. So, as I said, my name is Joan Garcia. I'm a telecoms engineer by education, so I'm kind of the world of networking since I was at university. But my main interest in this space is actually changing the way networks are designed, built, and operated in the future. And that's where I tap into network operations. So I firmly believe we've been doing things in a given way for many, many years now, but we have an opportunity to leverage certain technology, which doesn't come from telco, to actually make a change. And that's exactly what I would like to walk us through today, if that's okay.
Yeah, that sounds great. And just to touch on your AutoCon 1 talk, that's interesting. It was eye-opening for you. In particular, I've been trying to get a handle on IP optical coordination for some time, and that was one of the things that grabbed me. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We'll talk about that, but you've got some more good points here about how you got interested in what you just talked about. So, go back to university. Tell us who influenced you.
Okay, that's a good one. So when I started university, actually telecoms was my second choice. So I wanted to be a mechanical engineer. I love mechanics, but at that time didn't have a lot of opportunities, job opportunities in Barcelona. I was born and bred in Barcelona, so I
Gotcha.
decided to go for something a bit more fashionable. So I had a university professor, Dr. Xavier Hasselbach, which still teaches at university there in the Technical University of Catalonia, which saw something on me. I don't know exactly what. Maybe my curiosity about things, my look about how to deal with network boxes and how we could do things better. And he tried to entice me towards helping him with some Wi-Fi labs at that time. So I was the guy who was there working late night hours, getting the lab ready for all these students coming the day after. And when I started messing, with signal processing and then the analysis and all these signal patterns, I realized, oh, there's something interesting here. You cannot see any of these. These are radio waves, and yet you can transmit stuff at very high speeds and so on and so forth. Let's deep dive a bit more. So yeah, I started talking to Dr. Hasselbach, and I showed my interest to enroll the PhD program. Okay, I really wanted to go deeper into the technology, wanted to understand what I could do better for networking, theoretical networking at that time. But I guess very quickly I realized, I'm not the sort of PhD person. And I got deeper and deeper into applied research, into innovation projects. And it was also, again, Dr. Hasselbach who gave me the opportunity to join a project with what they call at the time Internet 2 Research Foundation in Barcelona,
Sure.
which were running these sort of projects. And that's where I started with my first pure networking project, which was about mapping the UMTS and MPLS IP traffic and managing the classes of service in a dynamic way, which, guess what, required a bit of software to be implemented and do stuff. Nothing new, but it actually pushed me to understand how to code for a transmission system, how to understand the different subtleties within the different classes in the network, and how to actually make it work so that we could pass traffic at a wireline rate. It was a bit of a challenge for me at the beginning because I wasn't a very good coder. I'm not a coder, a very good
Sure.
coder at all. But I could understand, the intricacies of the system and what I wanted to achieve. And one of the things that drove me at that time is, why on earth do I have to do everything by CLI in the boxes, command
Right.
line? Wow. I think, no, we can do better than this. And I started playing with scripting and so on and so forth. And that's where everything started. Then, yeah, probably I did a good job because they offered me a follow-up, a follow-up contract, working in that sort of series of projects. And at that time was with Vodafone. So I thought, maybe I can get into Vodafone and do a living out of that. But I enjoyed so much the innovation part of the story. I never actually pushed to get into Vodafone. I stayed with I2CAT, the Internet 2 Research Foundation in Barcelona, for many, many years to go. And yeah, that's where everything started. And as part of my work in I2CAT, we got into the early days of software-defined networking, with OpenFlow and all of that. And it was an amazing discovery for me. I thought, we can really leverage on these sort of things to do automation and make things happen the way we want, and then drive it through, a bit touchless rather than all of the intensity that we have in people up and down configuring things and gears and levels. It always sounded to me like a bit clunky, right? So yeah, that was my origin there.
Very good. Well, no, it's funny. We have more in common there than I thought. I actually started doing networking work as part of my graduate work. And I also had intended to go through a PhD program. But after the first year, I also realized, yeah, I'm probably going to be better off working. So more over an adult beverage on that sometime for sure.
Yeah,
Well, so
that's the
now you've taken this and you've landed in, a large a service provider, Colt.
yeah.
Um, and you have a lot riding on your shoulders, right? For any large network operator, and this is going to be one of a series of discussions with large operators, large and small, and in between. But tell us a little bit about Colt, how it got started, your customer base, things that are relevant to the conversation today.
Good. Yeah, definitely. So Colt started actually as it was an acronym. It's the City of London Telecom. And it was started back in the 1992 as a fiber connectivity sort of company. So it was literally digging up, the City of London and laying fibers to provide connectivity to mostly the financial institutions there. But very quickly, Cold realized about the value of the assets and about delivering the
Mhm.
connectivity, adjusting to the customer demand. So it grew very quickly. Just a year later, they already own 15 kilometers of fiber. And the good thing, and actually, I must say that's one of the things I like about Cold is that they really want to do things different all the time, and there is a lot of investment and push for innovation. So Cold didn't stay there as a just a fiber provider. It grew to a global scale, getting in many other markets, like the US and Asia Pacific, a few years later. And today is one of the biggest, well, it's an European base service provider, but it's one of the biggest providers in the world. Although it's classed as a tier two in the telecom industry, because obviously it doesn't have the connections with tier ones. That it's a bit of an artificial, the artificial classification of
Sure.
tiers in
Yeah.
telecom space. But I mean, coming back to dwell on about code is that ability to do things a bit different and to leave a bit of leeway on individual and teams to actually go that extra mile and test things that it's really important. It probably has been a big part of the success of the company over the last many years.
I see this interesting, additive effect where, we had the traditional telcos and PTTs in North America and Europe really building from that Bell system 5 nines availability heritage, right? And we wouldn't have had those early circuits, T1s, T3s, DS3s, Sonnet infrastructure without that very telco focused work. But, shame on me for not having done more homework on Colt. I think it's very similar to the emergence of the new internet service providers in North America in the 90s, which is how I got drawn into all of this. Finding ways to do things differently and more rapidly, and maybe not be shackled by the five nines of circuit availability to focusing on the service availability. Does that resonate with what Colt has done? Am I reading too much into your discussion?
No, it does. It definitely does. But don't get us wrong. I mean, we are all up for service availability, and
Sure.
that's actually one of the biggest or the most interesting points in how do we balance that obsession for customer service and availability and the ability to innovate with that. Okay. And probably we can touch on some of those maybe aspects related to automation a bit later on, but it's about bringing those two worlds together, which really makes a difference. Okay.
Gotcha. So from a services offered perspective, obviously you're providing connectivity, but what other services do you layer on top of beyond connectivity?
So Colt has two main areas or product portfolio is probably split in two parts. One of them is the more traditional connectivity options, as you said, Ethernet, packet, optical, and so on and so forth. But we also have a lot of services which are supporting the enterprise of today, especially services around security services, SD-WAN,
Sure.
SASE capability, and we are looking also at how do we adapt and how do we deliver virtualized capability and virtualized products also for our customers. We pretty much our tagline is, we want to deliver whenever, wherever, and however our customers want. So the however it actually allows us to go a bit and find, what sort of things need to be added into the mix, either through our own internal offering or through partnerships that really are spot on for our customers.
Gotcha. All right. I went through a mouthful of your title, earlier in the episode. Tell us what your title really means and the responsibilities that you have for delivery of network services at Colt.
That's a good one, actually. I want you. It's good that you also ask about that. So it's a long title: Network Platform Solutions Architecture. And I was when I go and do a presentation out there, I make a bit of a joke. It's far too long to understand what it is about. But I always say the same. Everything that smells of network software, network orchestration, and software overlays network. That's my remit of action. Okay. So in my role, when we talk about network platform, we don't mean the traditional hardware boxes. We mean all
Hmm.
of those network systems, software systems actually are meant to be designed, built to run the network infrastructure. And it's not the OSS, BSS part of the story, it's that thin layer of software, the traditional NMS, if you wish to, or the network controllers, where we are putting a lot of focus right now. And the solutions part comes because obviously when we get into software world, then things start to be more adaptable, customizable. So we look at how do we use software, also network level, to enrich the offering. Okay. And how do we tap those enriched solutions into the traditional, more transactional part of the story through automation orchestration is something that my team is definitely interested in.
Gotcha. Are you organizationally responsible for design and architecture all the way through operations, or how does the ops team fit in what you do?
Yes, and actually, that's a great question. One of our working premises is we need to get our service delivery guys and our operations guys very close to the process. Okay, it's sometimes painful because obviously the operations problem, number one problem, is the here and now and how to make customers happy.
Sure.
But we cannot design any sort of platform or architecture for softwareization orchestration if we don't bring them in. They are the main user of what we do, so we cannot forget about them. And it's about discussing with them, trying to bring them together, explain the value of what we are doing, even if it's a bit far fetched. They have to chip in and have their say now for silly things like how on earth am I meant to debug this? If my
Sure.
guys only know how to configure things on the boxes, how do they understand where a workflow went wrong if they don't understand the tool? Or how do they know how to change things in a model and then that becomes, a change in the network, which is a bit of a paradigm shift based on what we are doing. So yes, definitely, we try to bring them in. We also try to bring them in through a bit of a user-centered design approach. So it's not quite like that, but we are trying to get the most of the working principles of user-centered design so that they can come in, they have a space where they can talk about their pain points without dragging us into the here and now, and then we distill what they really are after into the solutions that we are designing.
Yeah, I think that's a really important information flow, right? Because it's in your best interest to make sure the operators who are the first line of defense and are your, number one internal customers can debug, can troubleshoot, can read that register on that box on that port, and so forth. That will help you close tickets faster and ultimately help you resolve customer issues faster. So
Exactly, and we have to give them also the assurance that it's not that they are going to lose control of the infrastructure. They will still be allowed to get into the boxes and find things, but we have to do it slightly different. So we have to now educate a select group of, if you allow me, ninjas that can actually
sure.
get into the network, fix the problem, and make sure they understand that they will not break fundamentally anything else, and then we will use the systems to reconcile whatever has happened and move on. But that reconciliation needs to happen. It's not that we can leave it there and let it grow a life on its own. We've realized that stranded configurations are the main source of problem in the infrastructure. They just rot and come back to bite us. As simple as that.
So let me make sure I understand what you're saying. Not having standardized configurations is the issue, or expand more on that if you would.
Now, having standardized configuration is good and it makes things predictable. We can have non standardized configurations, but we need to manage them and we need to
Sure.
be able to bring them back because you cannot tell the operations guys, no, you cannot do that by hand. So you cannot solve your customer problem here and now. That's nonsense. We are aware about that. So we will allow that select group of people to go and change things if things go really south. And then we build the mechanisms to reconcile all of that. And that's the important part of the story. Okay. To be
Yeah.
able to reconcile and recover.
Yeah. Right. So you have the immediate issue of solving the customer problem, but then do you have any like closed feedback loop on, okay, I had to go and make this change in our standard config, and the Ninja team has done it 3 times now. Is there feedback into the architecture team that maybe we need to change the standard way we configure something?
We will have. So we don't have it now, but we will have. But that's a very important one because that allows us to standardize the bespoke things. And if you don't have that sort of information, then whatever you design today is probably going to be obsolete very soon. Okay, you have to keep
Right.
enriching your implementation, your automations with all of that information and that knowledge coming from the ground.
Gotcha. Well, let's make this concrete, and let's kind of pivot to the idea of coordination of IP and optical networking. Now, this is one of the things that really caught my attention in that Amsterdam presentation you made. And in my view, now the industry's been dealing with this for decades, right? We haven't really done a good job of coordinating these two pretty fundamental, networking layers. And the way granted they are, different types of expertise. At the optical layer, you need PhDs that understand signal processing, and the secret sauce that all the vendors do to actually do high rate optical transmission. If you will, if this is the information superhighway, this is the physical, how I build the highway, right? Where IP is more painting the lines and making the road signs on the highway. And you have computer science people, people who are programming adjacent who tend more toward the IP side of things. It's logical configuration and it's a little abstracted. Um, but you talked about some interesting things here. What do you see as some of the problems with the separate silos, and what are you doing to try and bring things together?
I think traditionally, I mean, because IP and optical domains from a technical perspective have been so different, it hasn't favored any sort of coordination across. And unfortunately, organizations have been traditionally designed around those technology domains. So you don't facilitate the cross pollination across in an easy
Sure.
manner. It's always If things happen, it's because there are certain individuals which really have the vision and try to pull things together and so on and so forth. But not even your stakeholders within the organization are interested in that, okay? Because
Right.
they want to have a clear separation and no, this is how I do my packet services. This is how they are defined as a product and so on and so forth. This is how I do my optical services. And then you get into conversations when you start scratching the surface and start being annoying with them. You get into conversations about, well, this product here is potentially going to cannibalize that product there if we make it easy for customers to consume one or the other. And yes, so those sort of conversations obviously are tricky, but fundamentally we need to have my position by default is we need to have the option. Okay. We need to have a way to coordinate across so that we can make business decisions to go for one way or another and then look at our margins and maximize our profitability in the long run. Okay. And I don't want to go into the product side because obviously it's a much more trickier discussion and depends
Sure.
on every organization. But one fundamental problem is building things around silos, and that doesn't work out nicely. So what are we doing about it? At Colt, we've been looking at how do we define a software-defined networking architecture that caters for both. Okay, and we are not going to be pushing the same architecture for both stacks because we know that they are different, as you quite rightly said at the beginning. But we want to use architecture principles that drive both implementations, and we want to bring them together at the orchestration layer, at a higher layer. Okay. And that will give us the opportunity when we have the full automated stack on top to actually make a call on what's best for the customer on a given service activation time, for example. Um, and that said is easy. That implemented, and that was part of the discussion we had at AutoCon. It's a difficult thing.
Sure.
It's not about technology domains. It's about people. It's about the willingness to cooperate. It's about accepting ground rules on architecture, and it's about accepting that there are certain things that actually overlap, and then we can model them in a way that we can reuse. And let me give you an example. I mean, a connection service in the packet domain, Ethernet, for example, or in the optical domain for Wave, it's fairly similar. You want to go from A to B, and then you have to establish a link across that. Okay, I'm just pushing it. It's to a very simplistic space.
Yeah, sure. Yep.
But from a service model, fundamentally, in an abstract way, it's the same. A, B, and then a link in between. How do you then instantiate the link in between? What is the underpinning technology and so on and so forth? It's a matter of what's your provisioning stack underneath and how do you identify those A and B ends in your systems. Okay. But it's fundamentally the same. Okay. So those things, if we establish, an extensible service model that can allow us to model those things in that manner, then you can potentially drive either the optical domain to deliver a wave service point to point or the packet domain to deliver an Ethernet service point to point in the same way. And the high level automations to deliver them and then to integrate with the Northern OSS and BSS systems are actually the same. The only thing that changes fundamentally is the payload, the sort of service that you will configure in the end and how you implement it in the lower layers. The only, obviously.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
I love simplifying things, but you see what I mean. So there are
Yep.
many commonalities. There are many things that actually overlap, and we can discuss from a software perspective, from a modeling perspective, then can be realized in different ways. But you need to have the buy-in from all the teams, and you need to have also the buy-in from the teams and stakeholders that live above that. IT systems, product managers, and so on and so forth. So they have to come to terms with the idea of a service that looks like the same, but will only change or be delivered one way or another, depending on the payload of the call in an API, which is a fairly transformational way to think about those things.
Now, so yes, conceptually, whether I'm delivering, an Ethernet service or an IP service, between 2 points, conceptually very similar. But you have to do some work, right? And from a provisioning and maybe even writing your own custom software, you're very, SDN positive here. And the different vendors and technology suppliers you're working with may not have the same models and may not
Yes.
have the same APIs. As you and I discussed, we're going to mention vendor names here just because we live in the real world. It's not necessarily endorsement of any vendor over another. We do the same with open source packages and what have you. We're just mostly concerned about being real about what's going on here. So what's the role of your own software development, say in m- making equivalent or pseudo equivalent services, via a point to point Ethernet service versus a tunneled service of some point via IP.
So we have fundamentally broken our architecture into two parts. The what we call the federation layer, which is a bit of a higher entity layer, and then the network abstraction layer. Okay, so
Okay.
in very simple terms, that's how our SDN architecture looks like. At the network abstraction layer, you pretty much depend on what systems are you talking about. So in the packet domain, for example, we are working with Cisco NSO, and we use it to model all the different resources that we have there in a standardized manner. And then we focus on integrating the different models with the different parts of the infrastructure we have. But the optical domain is very different. The optical domain, still the NMS is the prime. So you have
Sure.
certain models which are embedded into the vendor NMSs, and you really have to consume what the vendor exposes of those. So
Hmm.
the fight on the abstraction layer, if you wish, for optical is how do you consume those models through different layers of indirection. And that's where the battle is around the APIs. Okay. One of the APIs, which is more famous in the space and most vendors are working on, is TAPI, the Transport API.
Hmm.
And we are trying to infer the changes in the infrastructure across different optical domains through TAPI, because most of the domains use that. But it's a tricky one because you're far away from the model. Now, what really can allow us to bring these two worlds together, these low level models that Cisco offers compared to the TAPI implementation from Nokia, Sienna, whatever it
Hmm.
is the layer above that. So what we call the
Hmm.
federation layer. And that federation layer has two main reasons to be. One of them, you need to be able to talk to many underpinning systems or even talk to boxes directly. And second one is you have to be able to run certain logic there without a huge effort on implementation. So this federation layer is not sort of a scripting, it's a workflow-based solution that we have adopted from Itential that allows us to run all of those workflows and ingest many different types of APIs
Okay.
with a fairly ease, let's put it this way, okay? Because we can focus on the secret source, on driving all of these pieces packet optical at the same time, and then delegating to the abstraction layer for the execution of that. It's yeah, as I said at the beginning, it's very easy to say abstraction and federation, but it's much more complex. Obviously, depending on the sort of workflow you implement, you need to develop a lot of railguards, and sometimes these tools fall short, so you have to do a bit of development yourself, and that's where things get a bit ugly because a commercial of the shelf product actually doesn't deliver that tiny bit that your team has been using forever, and then you have to get yourselves and your hands dirty, develop a bit of code, and bring it all together. Which what I'm talking about here has nothing to do with the traditional network engineering. Okay.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's glue, or the overarching services layer that has to work with the fundamental building blocks you have from the optical domain and the IP domain.
Correct.
Now, I know, that other network service providers, and your term federation layer is a cult specific term.
Yes.
But for that equivalent functionality, and it's largely the orchestration domain here, but not just orchestration. Some providers will make decisions to build rather than buy. What was that decision process like for you? And again, you already cited Itential here. This isn't necessarily a plug for any one orchestration vendor,
Yeah.
but there's an analysis you need to go through to make those decisions. What was that like for Colt?
Correct. So we did a very early analysis on our skills and our time to deliver the solution. Fundamentally, it was a combination of both. We wanted to have a solution. We wanted to prove the concept of the solution very early on, but we simply didn't have the skills to do development ourselves. Okay, and Colt is a big footprint provider, but
Sure.
it's not massive in terms of people. We're just over 6,000 people globally. we
Really?
don't we don't have big development teams. We don't have a huge development practice. It actually happens more in pockets, and it's mostly streamlined towards customer experience, which is where the
Sure.
business really has focused. But with our SDN strategy, we are starting to grow that capability ourselves. So we have obviously developed that capability through partner at the beginning, and it was easier for us to go for a low code sort of solution for that
Hmm.
federation because we didn't have the time to bring people up to speed, make them understand the business, make them understand the technologies, and then deliver something in a reasonable time frame. So it's been a bit of, yeah, we had to re-engineer the way we wanted to deliver. So short period of time, no skills. We really had to go and choose something that would allow us to go over the hump, and something that would allow us also to scale in the future, because obviously we cannot just write off all the investment we have done to date in a short period of time. We really want something that scales, and that's why the solution we took is looks a bit more of enterprise grade solution, but it's actually not. It has a lot of benefits on the telco space, and we have telco grade software with this product. So yeah, that was the sort of uh, thing that we did at the beginning. But by all means, any other telco, I mean, if they have the development capability in house, they have focus teams, they have the OpEx to run it, then they may choose to go and develop themselves, which is also another option.
And that's an interesting point because sometimes even if you do have the expertise to do that, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you should do. And there really needs to, be an ROI calculation. And you
Yes.
made the comment earlier that you have a financial element to your decision making process where you have to decide what makes more sense. Can you talk about that in this process at all? Like, do you do any rough, ROI calculations internally? And I'm not asking you to disclose any actual dollar, or euro or pound amounts.
Yeah, no, I will be told off if I do, but
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
but definitely, I mean, you must do an ROI calculation. Let's put it this way, because fundamentally, in the telco space, and especially depending on what sort of services that you deliver, if you're on wholesale or you're on IP transit, for example, margins are tight. Okay, everybody knows that. So you have to be very careful that bringing a new layer of software in your stack doesn't actually blow up your technology costs, and that's very important. So we definitely work out some initial ROIs. We wanted to make sure that our let's put it overhead on the new tooling
Sure.
didn't actually break the bank, and we wanted to make sure that it would be scalable. Again, technology or products we buy not only have to be scalable from a technology perspective, they have to be scalable from a financial perspective. So we need to have a clear view that they are not going to break the bank in 5 years, 10 years time. Because as I said earlier, we cannot afford to write things off very quickly. It's disruptive. Even if it's software, it's disruptive for the operations teams, service delivery teams, because they have to change tools, change interfaces. And we want to make sure, that it's not only sustainable from a technology perspective, also financial perspective, operational perspective. And we can touch on sustainability in the world of ESG later on if you want to.
Sure, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do want to move on to some of those other topics, but as we close out on IP and optical coordination in particular, is there anything that like the next big thing you need to solve here? Are there issues that you're trying really hard to tackle to try and bring these silos together? Could be technical, could be organizational. What does that look like?
I think we are trying to cover all the bases in parallel. So we have been looking at the organizational part of the story when we were discussing at the beginning about my role. So one of the things I do now, I have responsibility for, is to deliver software-defined networking capability for packet and optical. So the traditional director role on architecture for a telco it's mostly focused in those domains, but it's managed independently in each of the silos. In
Sure.
my case, that responsibility to have the solutions across, it lies directly on my role. And my colleague, which is dealing with network design, also has the same responsibility. So they have to look at network design across packet and optical, and they have to make sure that they do a good job across the board, across the two technology domains. In the traditional network design, it's a bit easier because you just need to talk about how each layer consumes each other. In my case, and in this new role that we're pushing for, is it's a bit of a headache because we are the outliers now. We are the ones that keep nagging the optical vendors, the packet vendors, the optical colleagues, the packet colleagues. We try to bring them all together and say, guys, in the future we are going to be doing things slightly different. We have to make sure we have some level of orchestration. We want to establish, common service model. We want to establish network APIs that will be consumed the same way, regardless of network technology. So how do we do it? And we are trying to push for that sort of thinking in all the engagements we have across the organization. But yes, definitely. I mean, org is one, technology is technology. So you really have to have your regular conversations with the vendors, try to steer them towards what you want to achieve, try to avoid lock-ins as much as you can, and then build your secret sauce outside on a place that you can manage. Okay. Again,
Yep.
that's coming back to the architecture. We wanted to make sure that in our federation layer we can develop, maintain our secret sauce. And then if we have to fill gaps with our own coding, we will do that. And that's fundamentally the way we envision the operation of our infrastructure. But we don't want to delegate a lot of that into vendors because then we lose control fundamentally.
Sure. Yeah. No, and there's that balance of dependence on what other technology providers are actually providing you and how you have to glue it all together for your network context.
Correct.
So when you say SDN, do you see automation as wholly part of your SDN approaches? Do you view them separately? What role does automation play in your SDN approach?
It's integral to our SDN strategy. So we call it SDN, but it's as in software-defined networking, but it's more software-driven networking, if you see what I mean. So
Sure.
it's augmenting the traditional concept of SDN and making sure we have a space and to manage all of those topics related to network automation, network orchestration, and making sure we have a comprehensive journey. Because what people sometimes forget about is that scripting, by all means, is already an automation technique. Okay.
Sure.
But those things cannot happen in pockets in isolation because fundamentally the power of the script, the power of the automation is very limited to a very reduced functional space or the scope.
It's a task.
Or
It's
the
focused
team.
on a task.
It's focused on the task, exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas what we want is people to think a bit bigger and say, okay, that task is perfectly fine. We are not going to get rid of your task automation, but it has to be part of a bigger thing because we don't want to limit ourselves to that. And we started, trying to bring in all of those task automation scripts and so on and so forth into a space within the SDN architecture, which is wired with the sort of tools I was talking to you earlier. So, and whenever they need to be replaced, because there's a bigger problem to address. So, for example, you cannot deploy a script at scale or whatever it is. Then we do the phase out of the script and bring in the more of the model-based workflow definition and so on and so forth. But it's all part of the story. So automation is at the core of the SDN strategy. We wouldn't be doing it if we didn't want to scale our automation orchestration capability, to be honest.
And so you must maintain some in-house expertise with scripting and automation capabilities to adapt your orchestration tools and make all this work together. Do you have a separate team that does that? Is it skills that are already laid throughout your network engineering team?
So definitely. So our network engineering team is actually quite forward looking. They have been doing automations, task automation and scripting, and even coding. You will be surprised the sort of things we have discovered in the relationship, in the engagements with our service delivery guys. They have systems that they have developed themselves in their free time, which is amazing.
Sure.
But the challenge is those things cannot live constrained to their functional domain because then they are a waste of resource and they cannot be reused and they could be doing a lot of good elsewhere. So yes, we our engineers, especially in the operation service delivery space, they have a lot of skills on scripting and on task automation, and we are trying to capitalize on that and then overhaul the entire thing. Now we started, if you recall, in the presentation that I did at AutoCon, we started looking at the skills we need in engineering to establish that sort of platform, to look at how do we overhaul the scripting approach, how do we become the locomotive of that automation journey, automation orchestration journey. And we have been upskilling our network engineers to be able to own, manage, and push for that secret source. And then this is a journey. We have to bring in our service delivery colleagues, operations colleagues, show them how these new sort of automations with this new platform work. Them, they have to embrace it and then start building on that. And I'm looking forward to that moment where they come and say, look, I want to use your platform to do X, Y, and Z. That's the tipping point. And we are very close to that, I must say. So I'm very happy because we are having super interesting conversations internally on how our original users are looking to become our developers, which is a different problem to have. Okay, now we have to coordinate almost an open source community within Cold.
Interesting. Well, you just volunteered yourself to do a follow-up episode in about a year. So
Okay,
we'll come back to you and see what kind of progress you make on that.
I take the challenge. Okay.
Excellent. Excellent. And because we've referenced it several times, I will in the show notes, I'll put the YouTube video link for that AutoCon 1 presentation that you did, and people can see a little more detail about what you've mentioned here.
Good.
The skills issue, let me use that to pivot into some of these recurring industry issues that we see from a NetOps perspective. Getting new talent into network engineering and NetOps teams is a challenge for many operators. Are you seeing it? And if so, how do you deal with it?
Yes, and it's very unfortunate, but yes, we are seeing that. So first of all, we want unicorns. We want software engineers who understand telecom networks or network engineers which understand software very well. Those don't exist, in abundance in
Right.
nature, unfortunately. And this is again the conversation about what's best, what's the best upskilling journey, and so on and so forth. So those don't exist. If they exist, they are very well, wherever they are, and they are probably doing very innovative projects in their own organizations. And there's another problem, which is actually cloud providers have been sucking, a lot of that talent
Yep.
dramatically because of the growth of the business, because of the healthy margins they operate in. Sometimes, there's a lot of talent that has moved from telco into that space, which is unfortunate. But well, I mean, that's given us a bit of a wake up call, and we are no longer alone. Those skills, those hardcore network telco skills are required elsewhere also. So we probably have to do something about it. And what we are doing about it is, opening options for our engineering guys. Okay. We want them to feel that it's not going to be forever the same. This is a very, very quickly changing landscape. We have to adapt. We want to be a digital provider of choice. It's no longer just a telecom, a digital provider. So we want to bring in solutions that have nothing to do with the network and must run in the network flawlessly for our customers. So there is some ground to cover. And obviously, we are not alien to some of the new technologies that are coming in, like AI and so on and so forth, that we have to
Sure.
do something about. Right?
You and I came into this under similar circumstances, right? We did academic work that got us. I've always said I was like bitten by the networking bug. And
Mm,
I found ways to do networky stuff in my first jobs that weren't really necessarily networking jobs.
mm.
And what's changed? Have we made it look too simple? Why is it? I understand the pull, right, from all the cool kids want to go work for the cloud providers.
Mm.
But is there something that we're doing wrong or that we could do better from a network infrastructure perspective to make it look more attractive?
I'm sure we can definitely do something, but and this is my personal opinion. I've seen and I keep seeing a lot of frustration in our industry
Okay.
because change doesn't happen fast enough, because it takes
Mm,
ages to persuade people, because it's that fear of breaking that fifth nine in the
sure.
string. Okay.
Yeah.
And fear and difficulty to change is not good. Fundamentally, I think I'm not saying we have to break everything by all means,
Sure.
but I think we have now tools compared to where I started my journey in implementing software for networks that will allow us, will help us, and will help our guys, our engineers on the ground to do things much faster, much more hitless way. And we have redundancy built in the network. So it's about how do we give them the tools so they can think, we can leverage them, then they can build, the sort of capability that helps them do their job faster and smartly, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good impulse for any field, right? But in particular for networking, I think we're always going to be torn between the software eats the world, Mark Andreessen quote, right? Where software is fungible and it can move much more quickly, versus the constraints of hardware and the physics of this connector goes into this port on this switch in this rack at this location, and those things will never move as fast as the software layer, the abstraction layer, the automation layer. And like, it's people like you and I that need to keep talking about this, and others, on how do we make those systems more agile.
Definitely, definitely. And I have had some recent conversations with some colleagues about, the role of inventory systems in our industry. Well, we need
Hmm,
them, but for
sure.
whatever reason, we keep stuck into the good old massive static inventory that rules it all. I get it. We are asset intensive
Sure.
sort of industry, but come on, I think there are certain things that we can do better on that front. And when you start, for example, talking about how to deliver service in an agile manner, on demand, and plugging things into self-service portals, then those sort of conversations become much more relevant. There must be a way to do things different. There must be a way that we can remove certain rigidity from inventory so that we push it elsewhere on the stack. Okay.
Yeah, customer demand is driving that, right? We've already seen providers that can give a self-service portal, and I can request connectivity between two locations or n locations and have it be active in hours, not weeks, or months or quarters, as some of us might be used to with older telco models of operation. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We do that. Our on-demand portal is
Yep.
exactly addressing that, and we want to step up the game there. So we you probably have seen a bit of noise about Cold and Network as a Service. We recently won some industry awards on that front because we really want to up the game there. Okay, there is a way to broaden the set of services we deliver, and we are consumers network service not only for end customers but also for other service providers. And that is what's putting a lot of steer into softwareizing the network and
Sure.
automating things. And again, coming back to the skills thing, that's where we need our guys to actually realize, this must be a wake up call. We have to do something about it. We have to bring in new skills and play with new toys, if you wish.
Yep. Yep. So much more to say there. We'll save that for another time. I do want to touch on one last item that you mentioned earlier when we talk about, ESG related issues with energy consumption and sustainability. Not solely a networking issue, of course, but
Definitely.
our optical gear, our routers, our switches, our firewalls all consume power. What's Colt doing on that front? What comes to mind there?
Well, before I answer the question, I want to dwell into one of the things we were discussing at the beginning. So, what actually attracted me of Colt is that relentless ambition to crack the nut of sustainability and inclusion and diversity in the company. So, Colt is an organization which is determined to leverage on all and every single person to achieve very stringent requirements in terms of sustainability, and that's actually given us a strong push for our approach to softwareizing the network infrastructure. Let me explain that. So, one of the things we have been working for a long time now with some of our partners and vendors is how do we actually see through our network? How do we get the actual consumption of every single service in our network infrastructure? Because that's something that more and more our customers want to know. They want to understand what's the real footprint of the services. They want to understand how to plan for their carbon budgets and so on and so forth. So we've been looking at developing a bit of network technology that allows us to record that sort of the actual consumption of a service on the network infrastructure. And we are working now on how do we make it available, not through just the traditional assurance stack, performance management and so on and so forth. We want to make it available on the activation stack so that actually you
Sure.
can look at the potential footprint of your service when you are ordering through the portal. Okay. And that starts with the energy footprint, but very quickly we can talk about the equivalent CO2, and unfortunately the equivalent CO2 footprint. Unfortunately, there are no industry standards yet on how to report those things, and there is a lot of people which is afraid of looking bad. We are working on that. We want to push the industry to have those conversations. Okay, there must be a conversation about how do we do those things. And you may wonder why I'm talking about all of this. That's actually part of the model. You really have to model your network and your resources so that you can capture those things and you can make calls on activation time, or you can allow the customer to make a call on activation time about what's best for them. Okay. Not
Right.
only because of the delay budget or the topology, it's because of things that are more related to sustainability, like the actual energy footprint, or the eventually in the future, when we have a proper calculation method, the equivalent CO2 footprint.
Well, I think that's super interesting. And in terms of, a TNOps perspective on things, one of my foundational principles is having a holistic view of not just the operation stack, but all those adjacencies that matter, including energy consumption. And, the conversations that are happening in North America for the most part are more very focused on the supply side. Okay, we know we need more energy. How do we deliver more energy? And it's interesting and it's important, but we don't want to lose focus on, okay, what does the consumption side look like and what does that footprint look like? That's
Yep.
again another good follow-up item for some point in the future. So,
More than
uh,
happy to talk about that. Yes, definitely.
as we wrap up this episode, Juan, thank you so much for this. Do you have any ops nuggets? Like, what are some of your biggest lessons learned? If there was wisdom you wanted to impart to network operators listening to this, what would you encourage folks to do or to think about?
Oh, people. Think about people. I mean, people are the greatest catalyzers of change and also the greatest gatekeepers of change. So it's
Sure.
super important to have an open and honest conversation about how do automation, how do softwareization actually work with your people on the ground, because there are things you cannot get away from. There's fear always that automation will mean something that people don't like. Like losing jobs and so on and so forth.
Sure.
But that's not why we do automations. Okay, we really have to. You really have to have the conversations, because if that's the number one thing on your operations guys, then you're going to struggle to deploy anything, and you're going to be fighting against a very very strong power, which is fear. You need to have those conversations. You need to care about people. You need to understand where they're coming from, and you need to work with them to actually, give them something that works. It's not always easy. Talking to people is difficult, but they are part of the mix. This automation thing doesn't happen in isolation. AI will not happen in isolation of people. Remember.
Right.
So that's
Yeah.
probably, I'm probably that's the one that comes to my mind as the first one to look at. Technology can deliver whatever you want. And if technology doesn't deliver, then go for it. Partner or find someone who can help you deliver. But people and organizational skills and change are the important ones to bring into the mix when you plan something like this. Definitely.
Totally agree. And we did not collude on that answer. I'm very much in the same place, right? And fear is a huge inhibitor of getting certain things done. It puts responsibility on leaders to know their team and communicate with their team, whether that's a handful of direct reports or hundreds of people in an organization, right? You've got to walk with people through this. And like any technology can be learned. The next version of EVPN or segment routing is not going to solve everything, right? People implement and operate, and couldn't agree with you more on that. Um, I have to ask you this because I ask lots of folks this. Do you have a personal story on a network or service outage that you caused or that you were involved in and helped resolve? You can be the bad guy or you can be the hero in this story, Joan.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have a story yet at call, which means the clock is ticking for me.
It will.
So
It's not if, it's when, right?
yeah, exactly, exactly. It will come at some point. I don't have anything I call. However, I can tell you about a story that probably we had in a previous life. And in a previous life, I was responsible of commissioning a new private 5G network infrastructure in Bristol, the city where I live, which
Sure.
has an amazing community behind bringing technology together with social use and so on and so forth. And we had to do big demos for to justify the investment we had done and so on and so forth. And you know when you prepare a demo like this, you always stage everything and you make sure your application, everything is measured, but you cannot control somebody tripping on a cable. Yeah.
Right.
And that
Yep.
somebody tripping on a cable, it was me. And it was a switch, which is
Oh,
so yeah, but we were very fast. Luckily enough, technology is good because it recovered fast. Nothing broke dramatically. But those are the things that you have to be really careful. As always, people, be careful with them.
and there's good reasons for good, neat, tight cabling
Yeah,
in pops and data centers, right? It's
definitely.
there's a reason why we don't want the spaghetti mess, right? To
Definitely, you
oh,
cannot manage the spaghetti. But yeah, I mean, I know it's a silly thing, but the silly things really sometimes can break your nerves.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. No, as I recall, you're not a short person, right? And
No,
you and I walking through a pop, we could do a lot of damage, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, definitely.
Well, you're very brave. Thank you for admitting that. That's we've all done something like that. Um, what's next in NetOps? What should we be talking about? Who should we be talking to? You have any homework for me of things I need to go pursue in this series?
Well, I mean, I think one of the big question marks in this space is how helpful is going to be AI at some point. Okay,
Sure.
because I hear a lot of people talking about AI being able to build their automations for them and so on and so forth. I think there's still not a proper use case for AI in this space. I think there's still some ground to cover. We are looking at AI, for example. We are looking at AI and how it helps us, not Gen AI, but probably mostly machine learning or small language models. How they help us close loops, automation loops, at very low level. Okay, and also we are looking at how can we overhaul our software strategy for network with AI agents that will be there working in the background, trying to support our operations guys in easy stuff. But I still don't see the big demand coming here. And that is something that especially concerns me is, all of the energy budget that goes with AI, it's going to fundamentally rule out our calculations of energy per service because it's going to blow it up completely. So yeah, there's some discussion need to happen there where it makes sense to use it, how is it meant to be used, and it's really worth it.
Yeah. I think there's a set of interesting conversations going on there that are helping people get through the hype, right?
Mm,
Now we're at the been dealing with this for a couple years, maybe almost 3 years now, where it's been really popularized, and now we need to burn through the haze and figure out, okay, what's useful, and how do I use it for personal tooling, like the chat based tools, but how's it being embedded in products as a means of delivering functionality, not AI for the sake of AI, right?
exactly,
Um,
exactly.
Stay tuned. More to come on that throughout the series for sure. Um, well, thank you so much, Joan, for being here. Would you? Where can folks contact you? And is there anything you'd like to point people toward what you're doing?
I mean, thanks very much for inviting me. I'm super happy always to talk about what we do. I think That's not the usual thing in telco. So I think we've had to talk more about what we do and share and criticize and be criticized.
Sure.
And definitely, I mean, people want to find me. They can search for me on LinkedIn or on even Cole's webpage. You probably can find contact details. But I'm always super happy to talk about everything which is related to networks and automation and making a brighter future.
Yeah, it's been great just getting to know you since Amsterdam and having these conversations. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you all for tuning into Total Network Operations today. TNOps continues to grow and gain momentum, and we'd love your feedback, especially topics you'd like us to cover and people you'd like to hear from. If you know someone or are someone like Joan with important things to say about NetOps, let us know. These episodes provide a channel to promote best practices and big ideas from people like Joan, Colt, and many, many others. Spread the word on TNOps, on LinkedIn, on social media, and even by word of mouth. Remember that word of mouth used to get to people with people for lunch, maybe beers after work, and tell them about things you listen to. Do that. Do all of that. I'd love it if you'd follow the TNOps group on LinkedIn and help the momentum continue to build. Let's get many other operators and solution providers involved in this conversation. You can drop me a DM on LinkedIn or send us follow up at packetpushers.net/follow up. See you next time on TNOps.